The bright morning sun shone over New York as Tom Wilson walked through Central Park, enjoying his morning coffee. At 65, the retired military strategist still maintained his daily routines. 20 years of military service had taught him that discipline mattered, even in retirement. He stopped to watch some kids playing baseball, smiling at their carefree laughter. That's when the sky turned dark. At first, everyone thought it was just clouds. Then the shadows grew larger, and people began pointing upward. Tom's coffee cup slipped from his fingers as he looked up. Massive ships, each one bigger than any aircraft carrier ever built, pushed through Earth's atmosphere. Their dark metal surfaces blocked out the sun, casting enormous shadows over the city. Within minutes, every phone, radio, and television worldwide broadcast the same message. Your planet is now under our control. Surrender your resources and submit to our authority. Resistance will result in elimination. The visitors, as they would come to be known, didn't wait for an answer. Their ships positioned themselves over major cities across the globe. World leaders scrambled to respond, but before any meaningful defense could be mounted, the visitors demonstrated their power. They started with military bases. Beams of intense energy shot down from their ships, turning tanks into molten metal and reducing concrete buildings to ash. The world's most advanced fighter jets were swatted from the sky like flies. Missile launches against the alien ships proved useless. Their energy shields absorbed or deflected everything Earth threw at them. Tom watched from his apartment window as chaos unfolded in the streets below. While others panicked, his military mind analyzed the situation. Something about the visitors' attack pattern caught his attention. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, almost mechanical in their precision. But they also seemed to follow strict, predictable patterns. When they encountered unexpected resistance, like a group of soldiers who used an old tunnel system to launch a surprise attack, the visitors took longer than expected to adapt. Their response, when it came, was overwhelming but delayed. Tom started taking notes, documenting every interaction between humans and the alien forces. The first week of the invasion was the bloodiest. Earth's military forces were decimated, and governments around the world surrendered one by one. The visitors established control zones in major cities, using automated drones and robotic ground units to enforce their rule. They demanded resources, metals, minerals, water, and biological samples from Earth's various species, including humans. But something unexpected happened. While most people submitted to the visitors' authority, small groups began to resist in ways the aliens struggled to counter. A gang of teenagers in Chicago discovered that the visitors' patrol drones couldn't track them when they moved erratically, dancing and zigzagging through the streets. In Mumbai, street vendors found that the alien sensors could be confused by certain combinations of spices thrown into the air. Tom gathered these stories, collecting them through old ham radio networks that somehow survived the initial invasion. He noticed a pattern. The visitors excelled at dealing with organized resistance, but struggled with chaos and unpredictability. 1 month after the invasion, Tom received a visitor of his own. Linda Parker, a former student from his military strategy classes, found him using the old emergency contact protocols they'd established years ago. She now led a small resistance cell operating out of the abandoned subway tunnels. They're incredibly advanced, Linda explained, spreading out maps on Tom's kitchen table. But they're also rigid. They don't adapt well to changes. It's like they're following a rulebook and can't handle anything that isn't in it. Tom shared his observations, and together they began to form a theory. The visitors weren't just technologically advanced. They were different on a fundamental level. They approached every situation with pure logic, but seemed to lack the ability to handle human unpredictability. Their theory was tested when Linda's group launched their first coordinated action. Instead of a direct attack, they organized what appeared to be a spontaneous street party. Hundreds of people gathered, dancing, singing, and moving in chaotic patterns. The visitors' patrol units froze. their programming unable to determine if this was a threat or not. In those few hours of confusion, Linda's team managed to capture a damaged drone. It wasn't much, but it was their first real victory. The drone's technology would later prove crucial in understanding their enemy. The visitors responded to this incident with typical overwhelming force, but Tom noticed something in their response: hesitation. For a fraction of a second, their units had paused before attacking. In that moment, he understood their weakness. They couldn't process human behavior that didn't follow logical patterns. Tom spent the next few days writing a report, documenting everything he'd observed. He used the old radio networks to share his findings with other resistance groups around the world. The response was immediate. Similar observations poured in from every continent. In Paris, resistance fighters had success by attacking while singing and dancing. In Tokyo, a group discovered that telling jokes over their radio communications somehow interfered with the visitors' ability to track their signals. Each success was small, but they were learning. The visitors controlled the cities, the skies, and most of Earth's resources, but they couldn't control the human spirit. In back alleys and basements, in abandoned buildings and underground tunnels, hope began to grow. People shared stories of small victories, of moments when human chaos trumped alien order. 3 months after the invasion, Tom sat in his apartment, now a makeshift command center for the growing resistance. Maps covered his walls, marked with resistance cells and visitor patrol patterns. Linda's group had grown, connecting with other cells across the city. As Tom watched the visitor ships hovering over the city, he smiled. The aliens had superior technology, overwhelming firepower, and perfect coordination. But they didn't understand human nature, the creativity, the emotional decisions, the illogical choices that often led to unexpected solutions. The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time since the ships appeared in the sky, Tom felt genuine hope. Humanity wouldn't win through superior firepower or advanced technology. They would win because of what made them human: their emotions, their creativity, their beautiful, wonderful chaos. As night fell over the occupied city, Tom sent out one final message over the resistance network: keep being human. That's how we'll win. Alice Green hadn't slept in 3 days. The scientist's laboratory, hidden in an old bunker beneath the ruins of her university, was filled with papers, computer screens, and stolen visitor technology. Dark circles under her eyes showed her exhaustion, but she couldn't stop now. She was close to understanding something important about their enemies. The captured visitor drone lay dissected on her workbench. Its inner workings were like nothing she had ever seen before, but after weeks of study, patterns were emerging. The drone's neural network wasn't just advanced. It was alien in the truest sense of the word. It thought in perfect, logical sequences, without any room for variation or creativity. A knock on the heavy metal door made her jump. Jack Stone, the commander of their local resistance cell, entered carrying a box of salvaged equipment. His clothes were dirty and torn, evidence of another raid on visitor supply lines. "Found something interesting," Jack said, placing the box on her desk. "Their patrol unit started malfunctioning when we played music during the raid. Not just static this time. Actual music." Alice's tired eyes lit up. This matched her emerging theory. She pulled up readings from her latest experiments on her computer screen. "Look at these brainwave patterns," she said, pointing to 2 different charts. "The top one is human. The bottom is from the captured visitor pilot." Jack looked at the patterns. The human brainwaves were irregular, full of spikes and dips. The visitors were almost perfectly regular, like a machine's output. "They think like computers," he said. "Exactly," Alice replied. "But it's more than that. Their entire civilization seems built on perfect logic and order. No room for emotion, creativity, or chaos. That's why they struggle with human behavior. We're impossibly random to them." She stood up and walked to a large whiteboard covered in equations and diagrams. "Their technology is incredible, but it's also rigid. They've evolved beyond emotion, beyond creativity. They see these as weaknesses, but they're actually our greatest strengths. As if to prove her point, alarms suddenly blared through the bunker. Visitor patrols were approaching. Jack rushed to the security monitors, while Alice quickly began hiding their most sensitive equipment. "They're using a new search pattern," Jack said, watching the monitors. "They're learning." But Alice smiled. "Are they? Watch this." She pressed a button on her computer, and music began playing through the bunker's external speakers, an old rock song with a chaotic drum solo. On the monitors, they watched as the visitor patrol unit stumbled, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. "Their neural networks can't process the random patterns in our music," Alice explained. "It's like static to them, but worse because there are patterns their logic centers try to analyze and fail." Jack watched in amazement as the visitor units retreated, unable to maintain their search pattern under the assault of human music. Once they were gone, he turned to Alice. "We need to share this with other resistance groups." Over the next few weeks, Alice's discovery spread through the resistance network. Around the world, humans began using music, art, and random behavior patterns as weapons against the visitors. In London, resistance fighters painted abstract art on their hideouts, creating patterns that confused visitor scanning technology. In Rio de Janeiro, they used carnival rhythms to disrupt patrol routes. But the visitors weren't idle. They adapted their technology, trying to compensate for human unpredictability. However, each adaptation was still based on logic, still trying to find patterns in human chaos. It was like trying to write an equation to describe a Jackson Pollock painting, possible in theory, but missing the point entirely. Alice spent her days studying the captured visitor technology and her nights helping Jack's team plan their operations. She discovered that the visitors communicated through perfect, structured sequences of data. Their language had no poetry, no metaphors, no double meanings. This was both their strength and their weakness. During one raid, Jack's team managed to capture more than just equipment. They brought back data storage devices from a visitor command center. Alice spent days decoding the information, and what she found changed everything. "They're afraid of us," she told Jack as they studied the decoded files. "Not of our weapons or technology, but of our minds, our creativity, our emotional decisions, our ability to act without logical reason. These things terrify them because they can't predict or understand them." The files revealed something else too. The visitors' own history showed that they had once been more like humans, capable of emotion and creativity. But they had evolved away from these traits, seeing them as inefficient and dangerous. They had created a civilization of perfect order, but in doing so had lost something fundamental. Jack leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "So they're not just attacking us for our resources." "No," Alice said, shaking her head. "They're trying to prevent us from spreading into space. They see us as a chaos factor that could disrupt their ordered universe." This revelation spread through the resistance network, changing how humans saw their invaders. The visitors weren't just conquerors, they were afraid. Their perfect logic couldn't handle the beautiful chaos of human nature. As winter approached, Alice made another breakthrough. The visitor technology didn't just struggle with human unpredictability. It actually began to malfunction after prolonged exposure to human brainwave patterns. Their logical systems couldn't maintain stability when forced to process too much human chaos. "We don't need to destroy them," Alice explained to a group of resistance leaders gathered in the bunker. "We just need to be ourselves, but more so." Every song, every dance, every illogical decision creates noise in their systems. We're not just fighting their weapons, we're fighting their entire worldview. The resistance began organizing what they called chaos events, mass gatherings where humans would dance, sing, create art, and behave in completely unpredictable ways. The visitor patrols couldn't handle these events, their systems overwhelmed by the sheer volume of illogical input. "It's beautiful, really," Alice said to Jack one evening, watching through their hidden cameras as people danced in the streets, celebrating a small victory. They tried to conquer us because they feared our chaos, but that chaos is exactly what makes us strong. The visitors still controlled most of Earth's cities, their ships still darkened the skies, but something had changed. Humanity had found its weapon, not in guns or bombs, but in its own nature. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the path to victory was clear. It would be won not through order, but through chaos, not through logic, but through emotion, not through strength, but through creativity. The very things the visitors had evolved away from would be their undoing. Professor Robert Smith stood in his makeshift laboratory, staring at the strange patterns on his computer screen. The old university basement wasn't much, but it was all he had left after the visitors destroyed most of the research facilities. What he saw on the screen made his hands shake with excitement. For weeks, he had been studying the effect of human brainwaves on captured visitor technology. The results were incredible. Every time a human came near their equipment while experiencing strong emotions, the alien devices would malfunction in subtle ways. At first, he thought it was just interference, but now he was sure. Human brain patterns were naturally disruptive to visitor systems. "Look at this," he said to his research partner, Mike, pointing at the screen. "When we expose their tech to recorded human brainwave patterns, their systems start breaking down. It's like our minds produce some kind of natural jamming signal." Mike leaned closer to the screen, his eyes widening. But how is that possible? Before Robert could answer, the radio on their desk crackled to life. It was one of the old ham radios they used to communicate with other resistance groups. The voice that came through was excited but clear. "Professor Smith, this is London base. We need to tell you something strange that happened during our last raid." The resistance fighters in London described how they had successfully taken control of a small visitor outpost. During the fight, their emotions had been running high: fear, excitement, anger. The visitors' weapons had started misfiring, their communication systems had failed, and their defense shields had flickered. Robert quickly connected the dots. "It's not just random interference," he told Mike after the radio call. "Our brains produce patterns that are completely alien to their technology. The stronger the emotion, the stronger the effect." They spent the next few days building crude devices that could amplify human brainwave patterns. The first tests were promising. When powered by the emotional output of just one person, their device could disrupt visitor technology within a small radius. The discovery spread through the resistance network using old-fashioned Morse code and radio signals. Around the world, people began building similar devices using Robert's designs. They weren't elegant. Most looked like a mess of wires and old electronic parts, but they worked. In New York, a group of resistance fighters used the devices to shut down a visitor patrol unit. In Tokyo, they managed to create a safe zone where visitor surveillance couldn't function. Each success was small, but they were adding up. The visitors noticed these attacks but couldn't understand them. Their logical minds couldn't grasp how simple human brain patterns could interfere with their advanced technology. They tried to adapt, to shield their systems, but they couldn't defend against something they didn't understand. One morning, a young resistance fighter named David burst into Robert's lab. "Professor, you need to see this." He was carrying a damaged piece of visitor technology they had never seen before. It looked like some kind of medical device. As they studied the device, they made another shocking discovery. The visitors' own brain patterns were incredibly uniform, almost artificial. It was as if they had evolved to think like living computers. This explained why they couldn't handle human chaos. Their minds simply couldn't process it. "They've engineered themselves to be perfect logical beings," Robert explained to a group of resistance leaders who had gathered in his lab. "But in doing so, they've lost the ability to handle anything that doesn't follow their patterns. Our emotions, our creativity, our chaos. These things are like viruses to their systems." The resistance began developing new tactics. Instead of trying to fight the visitors with conventional weapons, they started organizing what they called emotion raids. Groups would approach visitor installations while experiencing intense feelings: joy, anger, fear, love. The effect on visitor systems was devastating. They discovered that different emotions had different effects. Anger could disrupt their weapons, fear could scramble their communications, and joy could interfere with their sensors. Love, strangely enough, seemed to affect their systems the most, creating widespread failures in their technology. Robert worked tirelessly to improve the brainwave amplification devices. Each new version was more powerful than the last. They began calling them soul transmitters, though Robert insisted on calling them neural disruptors in his notes. The visitors responded by pulling back their forces, creating buffer zones between their installations and human populations. This was their first major retreat since the invasion began. They couldn't admit it, but they were afraid of something they couldn't control or understand. One day, while testing a new version of the neural disruptor, Robert made an unexpected discovery. The device picked up strange patterns coming from the visitor ships, patterns that looked almost like fear. The aliens weren't just retreating because their technology was failing. They were retreating because human emotions were affecting them personally. They remember, Robert told his team. Somewhere in their engineered minds, they remember what it was like to feel, and it terrifies them. This discovery changed everything. The Resistance no longer saw the visitors as invincible conquerors, but as beings who had lost something essential, something human. Their perfect logic had come at a terrible cost. As winter turned to spring, the Resistance grew stronger. More and more people learned to use their emotions as weapons. The visitors' control over Earth's cities began to weaken. Their perfect systems couldn't handle the chaos of human nature. Robert continued his research, but now he was looking for something more than just ways to fight back. He began to understand that the visitors' attack on Earth might have been driven by more than just a desire for resources. Perhaps they had come because, deep down, they sensed that humans had something they had lost. In his private journal, he wrote, "The visitors thought they had evolved beyond emotion, beyond chaos. But they didn't evolve. They devolved. They forgot that true strength lies not in perfect order, but in the ability to embrace chaos and still maintain hope. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us strong." The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. Humanity had found its greatest weapon, and it wasn't a gun or a bomb. It was simply being human, with all the beautiful chaos that entailed. Captain Mary Brown crouched in the shadows of the massive visitor mothership's landing strut. Her heart pounded, but years of military training kept her movements steady. The mission was simple but dangerous: infiltrate the mothership and gather intelligence. What she would discover would change everything humans thought they knew about the invasion. The neural disruptor at her belt hummed softly, its presence reassuring. These devices had become standard equipment for all Resistance fighters, protecting them from visitor detection systems. Her team of 5 spread out behind her, each carrying similar devices. "Remember," she whispered into her radio, "we're not here to fight. Get in, download their data, get out." The team acknowledged with clicks on their radios. Making sound would only disrupt their own equipment. Getting inside the ship proved easier than expected. The visitors, so reliant on their technology, never considered that humans would attempt something so illogical as a direct infiltration of their command center. The neural disruptors kept their systems confused just enough to mask the team's presence. Inside, the ship was cold and sterile. Everything followed perfect geometric patterns, without a single curve or irregular shape. The walls glowed with a pale blue light that seemed to pulse in regular intervals. It was beautiful, in a way, but lifeless. As they moved deeper into the ship, Mary noticed something strange. The visitors they encountered seemed distracted, almost afraid. They moved quickly through the corridors, their tall, slender forms tense with what looked like anxiety. This wasn't the behavior of confident conquerors. They found the central data hub exactly where their intelligence suggested it would be. Bill, their tech expert, connected their stolen interface device to the visitor computer system. The neural disruptors would give them only minutes before the visitors detected the intrusion. That's when everything went wrong. The data that poured into their devices wasn't military intelligence or invasion plans. Instead, they found themselves looking at what appeared to be a distress signal. The visitors weren't invading Earth. They were running from something. "Captain," Bill whispered, his face pale as he read the translated data. "You need to see this." The files told a terrifying story. The visitors had encountered something in deep space, something that preyed on advanced civilizations. This entity, which they called only the Darkness, consumed highly evolved species, turning their technology against them. The more advanced the civilization, the more attractive it was to the Darkness. But there was more. The visitors had discovered that primitive emotions, chaos, and unpredictability acted as a kind of shield against the Darkness. Their own evolution toward perfect logic had made them perfect prey. They needed Earth not for its resources, but for its chaos, its emotion, its humanity. Before they could process this information, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Not the normal intruder alerts, but something different. The visitors around them began running, real fear visible in their movements. The Darkness, one of the visitors' communications, echoed through the ship's speakers. "It has found us." Mary made a split-second decision. Instead of retreating, she led her team deeper into the ship, toward the command center. If what they had discovered was true, humanity wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. They found the ship's command center in chaos, a sight that would have been unthinkable just hours before. The visitors' perfect order had broken down in the face of true fear. On their massive view screens, something moved in the darkness of space, something that seemed to swallow light itself. A visitor commander noticed them but didn't raise an alarm. Instead, it approached Mary directly. Using their translation device, it spoke. "You should not be here, but perhaps it is necessary. We did not know how to ask for help." The commander explained quickly. The visitors had come to Earth because they had detected something unique in human DNA, the ability to maintain technological advancement while keeping emotional chaos. They believed this combination might be the key to fighting the Darkness. "Your chaos protects you," the commander said. "The Darkness cannot predict you, cannot understand you, just as we cannot. But unlike us, this makes you strong." Mary looked at the screens, at the approaching Darkness, then back at her team. The mission had changed. This wasn't about defending Earth anymore. It was about defending all life against something that threatened to consume everything. She made another decision. Using their radio, she contacted Resistance headquarters. "This is Captain Brown. The situation has changed. The visitors, they need our help, and we need theirs." The next hours were a blur of activity. The Resistance shared their neural disruptor technology with the visitors, while the visitors explained what they knew about the Darkness. Human chaos combined with visitor technology might be the only defense against this greater threat. As Mary watched humans and visitors working together in the command center, she understood that this war had never been what they thought it was. The visitors' invasion hadn't been about conquest. It had been a desperate attempt to survive, to learn from humans what they had lost in their evolution. "We thought removing emotion made us stronger," the visitor commander told her. "We were wrong. Your species kept what we abandoned, and now you may be the only hope for all of us." The effect was immediate. The Darkness recoiled, its attempt to process the information creating gaps in its defense. Through these gaps, the combined human visitor fleet launched their attack. But conventional weapons proved useless. Instead, they deployed what they called chaos bombs, devices that broadcast pure human creativity into space. Artists, musicians, poets, and dancers had recorded their performances, their emotions, their random thoughts. These broadcasts, amplified by visitor technology, created holes in the darkness that grew larger and larger. Mary Brown, now commanding a joint human visitor ship, watched as the darkness tried to adapt. "It's like watching someone try to catch smoke with a net," she said to her crew, which included both humans and visitors. "The harder it tries to understand us, the less it can affect us." The turning point came when they discovered that laughter was particularly effective against the darkness. The sound of genuine human laughter, completely spontaneous and unrehearsed, created ripples in space that the darkness couldn't cross. They began broadcasting laughter across space, children giggling, old jokes, spontaneous moments of joy. The visitors, remembering their own lost ability to laugh, joined in. The sound of human and visitor laughter combined created something entirely new, a weapon made of pure joy. The darkness retreated, but everyone knew it wasn't over. It would return, trying to find new ways to understand and consume. But Earth was ready. The unlikely alliance between human chaos and visitor technology had created something unprecedented in the galaxy. A civilization that could advance technologically while maintaining its connection to emotion and unpredictability. In the war room, Tom Wilson looked at the screens showing the retreating darkness. "We didn't just save ourselves," he said to the gathered leaders. "We reminded the universe that progress doesn't have to mean losing our humanity. Sometimes the most advanced thing we can do is simply be human." The visitors began to change their society, carefully reintroducing emotion and creativity while maintaining their technological advancement. They had learned that true evolution meant finding balance, not abandoning what made them alive in the first place. As the sun set on another day of battle, humans and visitors stood together watching the sky. The war wasn't over, but something fundamental had changed. They had found strength not in perfect order or pure chaos, but in the beautiful dance between the two. 1 year after the first contact with the darkness, Earth had changed beyond recognition. The once threatening visitor ships now floated peacefully above cities, their sleek surfaces reflecting sunlight rather than blocking it. In New York's Central Park, where Tom Wilson had first witnessed the invasion, humans and visitors gathered for what would become a historic moment. The peace talks weren't held in a grand hall or a military base, but in the open air, under the trees. The visitors had specifically requested this, saying they needed to learn from Earth's natural chaos. Their leader, known simply as the first speaker, stood beside the United Earth Council, ready to address the gathered crowds. "We came as invaders," the first speaker said, its voice translated through the new emotional hybrid technology. "We leave as students, and hopefully as friends." The peace treaty wasn't just about ending hostilities. It was about survival. The darkness still lurked at the edges of known space, waiting, watching, trying to understand. Both species knew they needed each other to survive. Alice Green had become the head of the new Human Visitor Science Coalition. Her laboratory, once hidden in a basement, now occupied a gleaming building where scientists from both species worked together. They were developing what they called chaos technology, systems that combine visitor precision with human unpredictability. "Look at this," she said to a group of visiting diplomats, showing them their latest creation. It was a defense shield that operated on random patterns generated by human brainwaves. The more people laugh, dance, or create while near it, the stronger it becomes. The darkness can't predict it because we can't predict it ourselves. Professor Smith's work had evolved too. He discovered that exposing young visitors to human emotions helped them develop their own emotional capabilities. A new generation of visitors was growing up learning both the precision of their species and the creative chaos of humanity. In a classroom at the new Joint Species Academy, visitor children learned to paint alongside human kids. Their artwork was perfectly geometric at first, but gradually became more abstract, more emotional. One young visitor had even tried to draw a joke, something that would have been impossible a year ago. The visitors shared their technology freely now, understanding that humanity's chaos would keep it from being used in the rigid, predictable ways that attracted the darkness. Spaceships were built with meditation rooms and dance halls. Defense systems ran on algorithms that incorporated random acts of kindness. Mary Brown commanded the first joint species exploration vessel. Her crew was equal parts human and visitor, each learning from the other. They had discovered that human intuition combined with visitor precision made them exceptional explorers. They found new worlds, new species, and spread the message. Emotion and logic could coexist. The galaxy was waiting for this, she told her crew during their first deep space mission. Not for perfect order or pure chaos, but for the balance between them. Jack Stone led the New Earth Defense Force, a military organization unlike any before it. They trained soldiers to be both disciplined and spontaneous, to follow orders while thinking creatively. Their motto became predictably unpredictable. Linda Parker established the Chaos Academy, teaching both species how to harness randomness as a strength. Her classes included everything from improvisational dance to quantum physics, all focused on maintaining the delicate balance between order and chaos that kept the darkness at bay. The darkness made one final attempt to understand and consume Earth. It sent probes that tried to learn human patterns, to predict and control. But Earth had become something entirely new. A planet where logic and chaos danced together in endless variation. The probe encountered children playing hopscotch while solving complex equations, musicians composing symphonies based on spacecraft trajectories, and artists painting with mathematical precision while dancing. It tried to process what it saw, but the mix of order and chaos proved too much. The probe collapsed in on itself, unable to compute the beautiful contradiction that Earth had become. After that, the darkness retreated to the far reaches of space. It wasn't defeated. Something that fed on patterns and prediction could never be truly destroyed. But it had learned to fear the unpredictable power of human emotion combined with visitor technology. Earth became a beacon for other species in the galaxy. Those who had hidden from the darkness, those who had tried to fight it with pure logic or pure chaos, came to learn the Earth way, the path of balance. The visitors who had stayed on Earth began to change physically. Their rigid postures softened, their geometric movements became more fluid. Some even developed the ability to smile, a simple expression that contained countless variations of joy. Tom Wilson, now an old man, sat on his favorite park bench watching human and visitor children play together. Their games followed no logical pattern, yet contained their own kind of order. It was beautiful in a way he couldn't have imagined when he first saw those ships darkening the sky. "We thought we were fighting for survival," he told a young visitor who sat beside him. "But we were fighting for something more important, the right to be imperfect, to be unpredictable, to be alive." The young visitor smiled, an expression its parents couldn't have made a year ago, and joined the playing children. Its movements were still precise, but now contained a hint of spontaneity, a touch of human chaos. As the sun set on this new Earth, the sky filled with ships from a dozen species, all coming to learn the art of balance. They called Earth the chaos heart of the galaxy, the place where logic and emotion, order and randomness, precision and creativity had learned to dance together. The war had changed everything, but not in the way anyone had expected. It hadn't been won with weapons or technology, but with laughter and tears, with dance and song, with the beautiful, unpredictable power of being human.